So what does the work with the expandeduniverse.com entail? Just so everyone knows.
Well, we have a blog feature, which is the thing that's the most dynamic. But there's a suite of columnists. Anyone can contribute if they'd like. Just write to contact@theexpandeduniverse.com. Basically the idea is we wanted to recreate something like the old StarWars.com that had occasional articles just about all aspects of Star Wars and the EU. But we've also got other features, just some static content, some like resources, quotes in defense of the EU, and was the EU canon? What did George think of the EU? That sort of a thing, and any other sort of reading lists, links to videos. Basically, just a growing resource for fans of the EU.
Yep, that's awesome. And so anyone watching can check that out if they want to. So what I thought would be great is I thought I would do, after some recent events, a video talking about the EU movement, as it's called, and like what it actually is, or what has caused some misconceptions about what the group of EU fans actually are.
Right, the so-called EU movement, right? Yeah.
We'll call it the EU movement for lack of a better word for it.
Well, I think it's worth defining. I mean, I think because I think a lot of these terms get thrown around, and you and I were just talking. I mean, I think a lot of people then are assumed. Some people get subsumed into then this thing that gets created in people's imagination. Well, there's this movement, then this person must be a part of it, and then that's when people start defining who's out of it, right? And this is where sometimes there's becomes lots of friction, and what should just be a fun fandom, right? So
yeah.
I tend to see whatever it is people call the EU movement as an outgrowth of an EU fandom, which is itself an outgrowth of the Star Wars fandom, right? And it's just to the probably, maybe you've got a definition too. To my mind, it's basically the best you could probably do is say it's a group of people who believe presumably lots of other different things from another, but who agree on one thing, which is that they lament the loss of Legends and want to see it continued along a parallel path. And that's about it. And then lots of people can believe lots of other things beyond that. But to the extent that there's a movement, right, that's it. It's some people who sort of tend to kind of coincidentally agree on this goal. But there's really no, I mean, again, I don't think you and I take orders from anyone. There's no sort of EU movement organization. But at the same time, there's clearly sort of a group of people and a group of ideas, and they kind of coalesce in different ways for different ends. But there's no sort of permanent sort of corporation, right, that sort of like delivers the EU memos, right? There's just a broad EU movement that basically believes one thing and has lots of different strategies and tactics for getting it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing is it's really not an official group or organization at all. Right. It's really just groups of people on the internet with like mind coming together, and other people have started using the term EU movement for it.
It's funny what an artifact of the internet it is. I guess it kind of has to be in this day and age. I mean, I'm sure there are people who also agree with us that Legends should be continued, who maybe don't have a Facebook account or Twitter or YouTube or something, right? And they're out there, but they're harder to connect with. But, I've seen over the years, people generally from the outside of whatever it is we mean by this movement try and figure out where does it exist and where does it originate, right? And so folks will look. I remember a couple of years ago, folks would say, "Oh, well, this group on Facebook called, I think, the Alliance to Preserve and Defend the Expanded Universe or something, right?"
I think the Alliance to Preserve the Expanded Universe.
Right. Yeah. They go. That's the EU movement. That's where it is, right? And I suppose there was a time where if all you knew was Facebook, that was probably a hub of activity, right? But that's just taking one social media account. There's Twitter, there's YouTube. I mean, I've always liked to point out to folks who say, for instance, think that to the extent that it's an artifact of the internet, that it exists just on Facebook. And I say, well, look at someone like Matt Wilkins. He doesn't have a Facebook account or Twitter or Instagram, and so, which is kind of cool because it just goes to show how many more people there are than you probably presume based on your own limited sort of social media experience, right? But there's tons of people out there in tons of different ways and tons of different platforms. It is funny though how, again, given what an artifact of the internet it is, and given how just funky our social media culture is, that different people tend to think. I mean, I see this on YouTube a lot now. YouTube seems to continue to be rising, particularly among EU fans. You've got a channel. I occasionally sort of post stuff on YouTube. There are people who are just convinced that the EU movement lives solely within YouTube, which is funny, right? They neglect the fact
Yeah,
that
that's
it's
funny.
much bigger. You know, there's folks who don't like. I talked to someone who is such a hardcore EU fan and who considers themselves part of this movement, who refuses to watch videos. You could send them something that's 5 seconds and they go write it up. You know, so again, it just goes to show we're all different. You know, but it's amazing how many people. And people, by the way, I'm a little on the older side. And there's people way older than me who remember, you know, who were like already in their 20s and 30s when the original movies came out, who are themselves part of what you might call this movement to the extent they believe in wanting to continue legends. They don't know social media, you know. they you know, they've got steam powered computers probably, right? You know, so.
Oh well, my grandparents don't even have computers, and I'm sure there's some other people like that.
And I'm sure they love legends too, right? You know.
Oh well, they're not as into the EU because the way they grew up, but yeah. There'd be people just like them that have read the books and everything, but just don't have the other technological know-how.
I've got grandparents into the European Union, so that counts for something. So
cool. And I think one of the other things with the EU movement is, like, you can't say that someone's not part of it if they do share the same goal, regardless of their other opinions, because it's not really a formal group.
Right.
So it's not like we're accepting or denying anyone. And it's not particularly that anyone can voluntarily leave if they do share the same goals properly as well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's
it's just sort of the thing that everyone would come to like minds about, and sort of just there.
Yeah, you can come, you can go. It's not. Yeah, you don't need formal permission. You don't need permission to leave either, right? It's not something you've actually entered or exited. It's just sort of something you believe, and you might change your mind. You might realize, hey, you know what? I actually think upon reflection that Legends wrapped up fine. Or you might think, hey, we got Marvel 108. That's all I wanted. I'm good. You know.
Or even you might think, oh, I don't want them to continue it because they would take any direction I don't like, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose there's even people now, and this definitely seems to be the case recently, who think, well, there are too many EU movement tiers, right? Who do think these other things, and I don't want to be associated with that, so I want to leave. Okay, I mean, you know, that's sad because I thought you wanted to see Legends, but if that's, you know, if that doesn't make you happy anymore, take off. That's fine. You know, I've been a lifelong Star Wars fan, a lifelong EU fan. And from time to time, Star Wars doesn't give me any utility, doesn't give me any pleasure. For whatever reason, I get tired, I get worn out, or, you know, you get tired of fights on social media about it. And this has been true even before 2014, right? And sometimes I take a break, you know, and I get that. Sometimes you need to. It's all about having fun. And if it's not giving you any pleasure, for whatever reason, you're free to go. You know, and that's fine, right?
Yeah.
But
because at the end of the day, it's a fictional universe and a franchise for entertainment.
Yeah.
So not connected to anything else unless someone tries to connect it by force.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's very important. It's somewhere in between. To me, it's somewhere in between. It's true and it's just a movie, right? It's somewhere in the middle, right? But we can't forget that at the end of the day, this is just something that's supposed to entertain, right? Sure, it entertains.
It does hold a place in our hearts, and we love it, and it has helped people through situations where they might not have gotten some life lessons from something else.
Yeah,
but it is still just stories to entertain people more than anything.
And that's why I do think there's a real value. And I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't want to knock the idea of movements entirely. I do think that to the extent that the EU movement is something that is, you know, maybe emerges out of an EU community, right? Or an EU fandom. I do think there's a value to a fandom, right? It can kind of become a community. And I think a fandom, you know, similarly, you know, maybe not everyone who's an EU fan necessarily wants more Legends, but just being an EU fan, which is easier to define, right? You know, because you like the aspect of it. What's so cool about that is, you know, we've never met in person. In fact, this is the first time we're sort of getting to talk face to face, which is really cool after, you know, a long time of like, you know, social media correspondence. But we don't live anywhere near one another, different continents, different time zones. It's been impossible to kind of coordinate this. And yet you and I have more in common because of just our EU love, right, than me and my neighbor. And that's interesting, right? And that's something we're holding on to. So you can leave the EU fellow fans. Say that again.
It's great how just love of the EU and Star Wars can bring people together.
Totally.
Across this way.
I don't even remember how, I don't even remember how you and I started talking, but I just think we just identified each other as just, oh, there's someone who posted something about the EU that's I like. Okay, great.
Well, so I'm talking about something, and I think the only official group you can say that actually has come out of the EU movement is Twin Suns, because they do share the same goal with continuing the EU.
It's good to have them, and obviously they are a force for good. And you know what's interesting about them is a lot of those folks seem to emerge out of like the alliance on Facebook and stuff. And what was nice is you know, in a way they sort of rose to the challenge, right? To the extent a lot of people, particularly on the outside, said, oh no, I think this is the group that officially runs the movement. They said, that's not true. But they said, hey, okay, if you think we're an organization already, let's actually create one. Let's do some good with it, right? And so it's nice. And I think they've been really good about keeping it big tent and keeping it focused on, you know, the twin ideas, right? Which is charity, do good things for good people, right? But also bring legends back. And I think they've got some really discrete goals that, again, everyone in the fandom can agree on, right? Who isn't for more legends, who isn't for charity, right? And that's really smart. But, you know, thank goodness they haven't done what I'm sure some would fear, is then say, oh, and our third goal is, you know, you can only like the Bantam era of EU books, right? Because that's EU, right? And it's like, you know, so they don't take an official position on the floating Clone Wars, right? Let's keep it ecumenical, right? So that's great.
And that's the way everyone should be. Like, everyone has their own opinions, but you can respect other people's opinions, and they're equally valid.
I just wish, in general, more people would say at the end of their sentence, in my opinion. I think that would solve 99% of all, you know, social media fights, right?
Yeah, it'd be so much easier. But then again, some people want the social media fights because they've got nothing better to do.
I think some people just like to fight. I think some people like to fight. You know, we were also talking about this a while ago. I mean, I think that I was so struck in the early days post decanonization of the number of people who seemed to sort of come out of nowhere to say, I am so upset about what Disney did. And yet it wasn't clear that they actually had any knowledge or existing sort of affinity for the EU. They loved the fight. They said, now here is your crusade I can get behind. Right, you know, and actually, in a really cool way, I think a lot of the folks somehow felt attracted to the EU, almost out of a sense of justice, and they've actually been able to like go back and now realize actually they really do love the EU. But there was a large number of people who just said, no, this is the fight I'm looking for now, you know, and
I'd like to think that there are those people that may not even particularly be a huge EU fan that just see that cutting it off the way that it was and rebooting it wasn't the right choice, and feel for that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've definitely talked with a couple of folks who take it seriously as literature, who just think this was just unjust, right? You know, just from a narrative perspective, right? You know?
Yeah, that's great.
So every once in a while, I do wonder like, you know, what happens if we get what we ask for? If we get more legends, but what Lucasfilm says is, well, we're going to give you X, Y, and Z, and then we're done. We're going to wrap it up. It's hard to grapple with, but I think I'd be happy, partially because I think I'd finally feel recognized by Lucasfilm, right? They hear us, right? And also, I guess in some sense, that is what I'm looking for. Of course, when that day happens, get ready for the fights within people who identify as movement leaders about what's that thing supposed to be? I want this. No, I wanted that, right?
And or even they read the story and say, oh, there's these politics they've put in it and whatnot, and we don't like that.
Yeah.
That's another side of it.
It was disconcerting to see how many people who again seem to sort of self-identify as EU movement folks, in other words, people who wanted more legends, seem to find reasons preemptively not to like 108. Really bothered me. Yeah. Really bothered. It was sad to see.
It's not even out yet, and it's more EU officially, because I was a little bit skeptical at first, of course, until we heard more about it. But just, it's like anything. Before you actually read it or experience it, don't criticize it, because you don't actually know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah, you know, and I think the reverse is true too, right? Don't, you know, read it before you love it. That's fair too, right? You know, so, and it's so, you know, and the great thing too is like it's really okay for someone to call themselves an EU fan, be part of the EU fandom, and even identify as an EU movementeer if all they've done is seen like one episode of the Clone Wars. Because if that's what you connected with, then that's all that matters. And I do sense sometimes people feel this race to try and prove how much they've got, or the knowledge they've got, right? And it doesn't have to be that, right? It's really okay to just say, you know what? I know I'm late to the party. I know the EU was decanonized years ago and it's been around for 40 years, but I just got into it. Boy, I think that's great. In fact, I really envy those folks because they're in for a really fun ride, right? I wish I could do it over again, so.
I've got part of that ride out of interest because after the decanonization, I still hadn't read a lot of the stuff. I read a lot on Wikipedia, but I hadn't read a lot of the stuff. So now going through them, a lot of it's first time reads and I'm loving it. It's
fun, right? And there's so much too. I mean, the great thing is, and I've said this a number of times, it's really limitless. I mean, there is no one has a comprehensive list of every EU story out there because we keep finding them every year.
I tried.
It's amazing how many, you can compile all the best ones online. And the thing is, the reason why it's always incomplete is we're going to find something that literally no one knew about, right? They forgot about, right? Which is great. So it's a never-ending story. It would take a lifetime for someone to read now, right? I remember in 2014, and there's a very ironic, I think, positive twist to the decanonization, is I think it forced a lot of EU fans to kind of put aside some of their. I mean, people forget pre-2014. The EU fandom was divided. The Star Wars fandom was always divided, right? It's a bit of a myth that now it's just been sort of shaken up by Disney and stuff. But there was always people who had different disagreements. And as a hardcore EU fan myself, I just remember, because I'm not a video gamer, I was just never super into the Old Republic stuff. And I actually didn't even really buy those books all the time when they came out. But when 2014 happened, oh yeah, okay, now this is my EU, right? So I did the thing,
Yeah, I think the interesting thing was the choice was all or nothing with the EU as well, because even if they tried to keep part of it, it'd still feel weird, I think.
Oh yeah, it took me a long time to see that, but I think the silver lining was that they just did a clean slate break, right? I mean, they've been talking for a long time. I mean, the funny thing about the EU movement is that it really does go back years before the decanonization, right? There were folks who were, worried about the Filoni Clone Wars as early as, the first few episodes, right? Just based on some things. And there was literally a petition put together that Leland Shee even responded to. So, he was sort of beginning to say, don't worry, we get it, we get it, right? I forget what it's called. It was, do you remember in Revenge of the Sith, like there's the petition of the 2000?
Yeah, I forget exactly what it was called now, but yeah.
I think it's like a deleted scene, but the novel gets into it. Yeah. It's like the senators who want to sort of come and petition Palpatine or whatever, right? There was actually an online petition of the 2000, which if you go back and look, there's still some archive versions of it. You'd find a lot of very sort of high profile Star Wars fans, many of whom are like pro new canon, who nonetheless at the time were like, what's happening here, right? But again, there's been divisions for the longest time. I kind of forgot where I was going with that, but I just thought, I was going to say, yeah, that's the thing. We saw the writing on the wall, and we knew that a decanonization was coming for years. But yeah, they'd been warning us that they were going to pick and choose. And I just don't know what I would do. I don't know if I could. Would I be able to like keep the bookshelf collection up there and somehow get like a decoder ring to figure out which parts of it were storyline or not? I just like that at this point, everything pre-2014.
Yeah, it's nice in hindsight because then it gives us a clear-cut way to say, yeah, this is EU.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Even though they could have handled the transition better, but it is what it is now.
That is so unfortunate. And I'm genuinely at the point where, first of all, I should say Marvel 108 was everything I wanted, even though I said support it even if it's garbage, right? Which I didn't think it would be, but it could have been, easily could have been. But it was wonderful, loved it. And in a funny way, I feel like, okay, like I waited 5 years, I like this, right? And like if this was the last thing they gave me, at least it was something, right? But I keep forgetting what I'm saying. It's really late time, by the way. What was I saying? I don't even remember. What was our thread?
What am I saying now? Yeah, talking about just the transition.
The announcement and everything. I'm at the point now where I don't care if we never got Sword of the Jedi, which I'm sick of asking for to the point that I don't even want it. I'm just done. Force Unleashed 3, the list goes on and on. At this point, if all they did was try and re-message why they made the break, I would be fine. In other words, if that's all they did, I'd say, okay, right? Just lie to me. Just give me a better sort of reason. But the most ham-fisted.
Because creative freedom isn't the real reason.
No, it's not. It's there are a lot of interesting reasons. I still don't think we entirely know the real reason. I've got some theories, but I think the most scandalous thing is do whatever you want. Reboot, do a new storyline, go for it. Right? I totally get that from a certain point of view. But why did they have to put an end on the old? That's the thing that makes no sense to me, right?
That's the thing that really irks me, because if they said this wasn't canon, but we're continuing the timeline, then fine.
Yeah, totally, right. And they let elements in the fandom, I think, the broader Star Wars fandom, I think, go too long, too far with the, well, they decanonized. It must have been for a reason. It must be because the old stuff's garbage or because it's a mess of contradictions. The problem was they never stepped in to help correct that narrative, right? They let that be the narrative, right? And it's the waters are so muddy now, but
but the main thing would be just the simplest way Occam's razor to explain it is they had a different vision for Star Wars and they wanted to go with their vision rather than what would come before.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I'll put a slightly more cynical spin on it, if you don't mind. Slightly negative.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll try and put a bit more positive spin on it.
No, I appreciate that, but I'm the voice of doom and gloom. No, I mean, it's like, I think the way, at least the optics of it, right, I think were unfortunate. Again, I just think in every way their transition was ham-fisted, but it sort of felt like the EU was like a gigantic collection of voices that sort of George and Lucasfilm licensing sort of let in to tell further glimpses of this continuous story. And it sort of seemed like Disney Lucasfilm was basically like, well, we get that approach, but we want to be the one voice now. It's like we're still adding our flavor, but it's just ours now. And it's like, so that's just to optics how it looked, right? And that was to me the part about it. Yeah,
can definitely see that, because you see that even with some of the books and things, from what I've heard, they just can't write about some things because they want to tell the important stuff in the movies and the TV shows and whatnot.
Well, that's right, and I have to be very careful here because I've explored the new canon. It only to an extremely limited basis. I haven't seen the films or anything. I read a couple of the early comic books and Tarkin. That's about it. But yeah, from everything I've heard, and it makes sense, right? If you believe the rhetoric, that it's and even the way they're talking about Episode 9 now, as it's the end of this saga, the end of Skywalker saga. It's like, hold on, it's like, before 2014, Star Wars was always one story, regardless of the medium, right? And I think the weirdest thing about what's happened to the new canon, and in some ways I think the reboot is partially an artifact of the following, which is that everything in our pop culture is just movie focused now. For some reason, cinema sits at the top of like a pop culture pyramid. And it's so weird. For the longest time, you had Jurassic Park cinematic universe, Marvel cinematic universe. And it's like Star Wars was bigger, but now it's like the weirdest move they made was to kind of like, kind of remove the magic and to be like, oh, it's just another cinematic universe, which makes everything else not an EU, but just media tie-in, right? So it's like, why would they do something big,
One of the big reasons why I do call it still the expanded universe and not Legends is because they don't call their other material expanded universe, because it's all one canon time material stuff sort of thing.
That's right. I mean, you can get into some potentially nerdy linguistic sort of things here. But I mean, there's another sense in which it's really just an extended universe too, right? When you imagine that, like, because so much of the kind of the non-movie content, it's just about backing up the films and the TV shows and stuff, right? So it's like, the interesting thing about the EU is you could take any random book or story off the shelf, and chances are it might not be about Skywalkers or something, right? Yeah. That's what's so neat about it. It really expands the universe.
See the later content that was being released. Yeah,
right. So I don't know. It's I'm a little sticky about whether or not to call the new stuff EU. I noticed that every time they put out a film novelization now, they call it the expanded edition. It's a little sort of like, it's a way of kind of hooking maybe some of us in, right? But
of course, the novelization has more in it than the actual movie.
Yeah, right.
It's like Revenge of the Sith has so much more and so many expanded universe connections in it compared to as well.
Yeah, what a good book. I talked with someone recently who hardcore EU fan who hadn't read it yet. And I go, oh my gosh! I mean, one of those classic cases of I'm assigning homework. I'm like, please, please, please read it immediately. Let it jump the queue, you know. So
if you're watching this, read it.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's the best movie novelization.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so, yeah, so good, so good.
Yeah. I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit more about a recent video you did as well about S-Canon.
Oh, great, yeah. Yeah, that's been on my mind a while. You and I might have, in a couple of ways, you inspired me because we had some conversations a while back about something about, you know, is this S or C canon or what, you know, and it kind of got me
thinking. I think that was talking about the RPGs.
That's right. Yeah, it had dawned on me for a while that I think at least one of the things about S-Canon that you tend to see a lot in just taking YouTube videos by EU fans when they talk about it, it's kind of this throwaway explanation of what it is, right? And folks say, well, secondary canon is kind of this place to put like video game content that doesn't mash with the overall continuity. And it's like, well, that's true. And that's kind of how it's probably best used. So again, like Kyle Katarn can become the Emperor in Dark Forces, even though we know in sort of the mainline continuity he can't, right? So you get to play it, you really get to play it. You know, it actually happens to you with these actual characters. It's just that it's not the C canon continuity. So what do you do with it? Well, you put it in S canon, right? And then sometimes there's stuff that's just by definition N canon infinities, right? Great.
Yeah, well, I've always thought like your alternate ending in the video games, your example with Dark Forces and the Force Unleashed Dark Side ending in that, we're all just infinity stories anyway, the options.
This is interesting. This gets controversial. And I mean, in some ways, what's tricky about S canon is like there's a certain extent to which, well, if it's not C canon, well, then it might as well be infinities, right? Until the point at which someone pulls it up. And so there's this weird sense in which it's like S and N canon are kind of hard to distinguish, right? Again, EU fans do a good job of saying, well, no, there's what ifs over here, and then there's like the kind of the slight alternate choose your path stuff that are S canon, but it's like there's only a grain of distinction. And my point in the video was to say, by the way, that's what we think it is. In reality, Lucasfilm used it as a trash bin for stuff that they hadn't done any due diligence on, right? So anything that was old, they said, we don't know what to do with it right now. It's there for the time being, right? And I think that's screwed up, even to this day, a lot of our understanding of content that they had called S-Canon for really dumb reasons.
Yeah, it's interesting, that perspective, because I wasn't around when they made that decision, at least in the Souls fandom. I don't know if I was even born.
How old are you? I'm just curious.
I was born in 1996.
Oh, okay. Okay, great.
So probably wasn't around, for, at least in the Souls fandom, for when they made that decision. But it's an interesting perspective to look at that.
Well, it's hard to believe. And I only ask because, yeah, it's hard to believe it wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things that they did it. I mean, Phantom Menace had already come out, right? I mean, to be honest, I don't entirely know when the hierarchy itself got created, because it wasn't something that was like just announced, right? It was something that kind of, it would kind of come out in the context of, if I remember correctly, it would kind of come out in the context of Star Wars forum conversations with like Leland Shee and others, right? So in 2000, Leland Shee is hired to build the holocron, right? Which is what allows the hierarchy later to be created, because the holocron is where they first were able to say, you know, literally build a profile on the guy Kyle Katarn, right? Instead of just on Dark Forces, right? And so that level of you know, granular detail is what then allows them to say things are on different tiers. And again, I think it's probably as late as like 2002 that you finally start picking up on what this hierarchy is, right? They weren't always super sort of transparent about that. They didn't need to be with us per se, right? Which is a shame though, because for
the fans that are reading the EU have that attention to detail where they'll research things and say, yeah, that's what it is.
Totally. And which is what makes the EU so cool too, because so many of those fans, I mean, it lasted long enough that tons of fans became authors too, right? And were able to pull that stuff in, you know? So like when Troy Denning is writing in Fate of the Jedi about things that he's pulling out of stuff that he worked on at West End Games because he was a fan in the late 70s of the films, it's like, it's a lifetime of contributions and synthesizing. It's really cool. But I wonder about that again, like that, you know, can you collapse S and N canon, right? Because if you think about Visionaries, which was the N canon sort of trade paperback they put it. I mean, isn't that basically where they pulled the idea of Maul coming back and being like half a robot?
Yeah, that was the Wolverine storyline where Maul came back, and I think they did it on purpose as a non-canon story because they weren't planning to do it.
Yeah, right.
Until it happened in the Clone Wars.
And that's the thing, right? So it's like something from a higher tier was able to pluck something even out of S-Canon, right? So,
and of course, they do it in a different way. And I sort of how I view it with S-Canon, I should say, is S-Canon's everything happened, but if there's a different detail of something, like the small details, they might not be quite true to what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a point of view, I guess you could say, looking at it compared to this is what actually happened.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. And in some ways too, my thoughts on S-Canon though are maybe a little they're a little too checkered by what it's supposed to be in the real world, right? Like like I get that perspective inside the universe, right? But in reality, the hierarchy is not meant for us as much as it's meant for other licensees of Star Wars content, right? So it's like it's literally about what do you have to obey and what don't you have to obey. You don't have to obey S-Canon, but if you want to rescue it, go for it. But again, that's the thing about Maul. You're right. The story in Visionaries isn't the story in the Clone Wars, but that one element is, right? And that's the whole point of the hierarchy. That's what was so different, is you could break that apart and just say, boop, just the existence of a Maul with those spider legs is now C-Canon or T-Canon, whatever the heck, Let's not even talk about T-Canon right now, right?
That opens a whole can of worms.
Yeah.
And
just to
S-Canon and Scoundrels referencing Han getting the reward money stolen by the pirates is a great way to connect everything together for how I've seen it in universe of they did happen.
Yeah.
It's just details on how they tell the story.
Yeah. I think the coolest thing about this, and I can't remember if I mentioned this in that video the other night about S-Canon, but one of my favorite examples of an S-Canon thing that was elevated to C-Canon, but in a really kind of backwards way, was there's this story in the Marvel comics. Oh, I forget, now I forget what it is, but there's some story in Marvel comics about like the rebel pilots and training mission or something like that, right? Well, it's contradicted elsewhere, right? But what C-Canon later came around to do, I think in a Wizards of Coast supplement, is they sort of said, well, that happened. It's just that it happens in the context of a lesson that is told to rebel pilots, right? So the thing you read in Marvel comics is just a story. It's literally a conscious story. And I think that's cool, right? That's a neat way of kind of making it work, right?
Yeah, and that delves very much into like Shadows of Mindor,
totally.
All of the and everything.
Which thankfully you did a video on. You called me out. Thank you for doing it. I really appreciate it. You're the only person I know who's ever talked about it. So thank you, sincerely.
Because I was reading I'm reading the EU novels in chronological order, as best I know how, and I'm started doing the reviews, and I skipped the Return of the Jedi novelization because I'm like, well, I've read it. But pretty much I'm reviewing each of the novels, and I'm not going to skip any of them. I think I'll just reread stuff as well from now, which would be great as well.
That's good.
Read other things.
But yeah, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, but unless you've already seen Callum's review. But yeah, there's potentially the case where it's a story within a story, which again I think is great. Allows a lot of flexibility narratively.
The ideas it introduces with the holodramas were made, and so that could be where people get all the different ideas. And even reading Wedge's Gamble at the moment with the museum on Imperial Center, Coruscant, where the Emperor's twisting everything to give everyone, basically brainwash them into believing something that wasn't true.
Yeah. Well, and for folks who haven't seen, say, like the Clone Wars and are more familiar with just sort of like the kind of the media within the universe, right? I mean, even something like the Revenge of the Sith novelization, right? The extent to which like the holonet is used, it's the CNN of its, it's really important. And it's just something you don't get from the films or the prequels or anything, right? That you really get in the EU, and it becomes a really helpful narrative device. How did people know these things? Why didn't they know other things? It's pretty critical.
Yeah. Great ideas that they introduced in those days as well. With all the aftermath of Return of the Jedi and everything, especially now at the moment reading Wedge's Gamble, with how they've controlled the populace and everything, even after the Emperor's death, is great.
Mm-hmm.
It
seems like you're enjoying those. Those are pretty universally loved. Those are great. And I was telling someone recently, just apropos of nothing. To me, those are my favorite covers. Not to judge a book by its cover, not to be too superficial, but I think that series is just, those covers are just gorgeous. I wish they were posters. They just, some of the best of the Bantam era. I love everything about those. I just love the look of them. And anyway, great series.
Far cry from Ruins of Dantooine, yeah.
Poor Ruins of Dantooine. Poor Ruins of Dantooine.
Oh, that's it was an okay story, I thought, in the end. Like, it was in its own separate thing, but it was still very much influenced by the whole MMO aspect that it was
totally. And it's funny how it's a shame. Last year, I think it was, there was a really cool fan effort. There was a book that was sort of self-published by a group of Galaxies fans. And it's still going, by the way. You know, people have created this sort of like,
they created the emulators for it and stuff.
But some folks put together some really cool stuff celebrating that. And it's funny how quickly we've forgotten about Galaxies, I think. But so, yeah, like there's probably people now who don't even remember what that is, who see that cover and think, what on earth is this, right?
The weird thing for me, I tried playing Galaxies a bit at the start, but I just think I need someone who knows what they're doing to actually go through how to get places and what to do exactly, because I'm pretty lost. I think I drove out into the desert and lost my speeder.
Yeah, I was never a big video gamer when it came to Star Wars, and I recognize I missed out on quite a lot. I mean, even now, right? You know, I could be playing Old Republic and stuff, but
Jedi Outcast coming out on the latest consoles.
That might be a good way to get back on. I'm really excited about that because that was actually that was developed just a few blocks from where I am right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
At Raven, and which is kind of fun. So, and I got to meet one of the conceptual artists on that game.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, he just now he's just like a freelancer, just has like a Patreon. He does some stuff. His name's Jeffrey Moy. You can look him up, MOY. But it's really great. He sells a book that I picked up where he's got unused conceptual art for that game. So you kind of get this like behind the scenes extra EU glimpse. It was really neat. It was kind of fun to talk to him about, you know, what kind of guidance they got from Lucasfilm and stuff, just to sort of be part of the process. But yeah, I'm super excited about that. It's sort of like kind of like the hometown game here, you know, so.
It's great to be so close to everything because here in Australia, we go, everything's over in America. Yeah.
One of these decades, they'll do Celebration down there. Don't worry. Where are you in Australia, by the way?
I'm in Sydney at the
moment. Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, I was born in Adelaide, and then my dad had to move for work over to about an hour and a half out of Melbourne, and then we moved up to Darwin in 2015.
Oh wow, okay, that's pretty far, right?
Yeah, it's in the middle of the top if you don't know the geography, but it's about the same as between Adelaide and Sydney. And yeah, pretty far anyway.
Is Darwin on the north coast, right?
Yeah, in the north, up the middle of Australia. We did a nice 4-day road trip with all the gear.
Wow.
That's cool. But yeah.
Well,
over here, it's really hard to get stuff. It's like looking for EU books. We can't just go into our local bookshop and find a heap of them. Like I see so many people in America going in and saying, oh, here's a bunch of EU books that this place still has. There's some secondhand bookshops, but they're not as commonly having Star Wars books as easily as there. And especially up in Darwin, I noticed there was one bookshop an hour's drive away.
Wow.
So I had to get a lot of my stuff online.
It's funny because I've actually picked up some things from Australia. If you go on eBay from North America, there's a surprising number of EU things where you are. And I don't know why that is. And I think that it might be the case that there's probably stuff from like Grosset and Dunlap, some like UK publishers that probably have a clearer chance in Australia,
the
right?
Books we get here are from the UK publishers.
Right. So you have like the Arrow editions, or what's the publisher?
Arrow and Century, I think, is the other one. And I forget if there were others.
There's an insane number of publishers, and that's a fun thing to remember. Like when folks are looking for like the full set of things, it's like you can't forget that there's literally something called Ladybird Publishing, right? Which is Clone Wars books, and there's something called Grand Dreams, which published a lot of the old like Marvel comics in like trade paperback form in like the early '80s. There's a ton of publishers. It's much bigger than that, you know.
Interesting, because I've just sourced things from wherever I can get them, and so I have a combination of some from American publishers and UK publishers.
You got to just pull it together. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, it is. We are in an enviable position, I guess. I've actually, in a couple of cases, just for fun, I've picked up. There's some UK editions of a Wild Space and what's the other one?
No Prisoners.
Yeah, right. Which are hardcover, which you can't get in America. They didn't.
I've got the hardcover
here. Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of fun, right? So I'm at the point where I've done two things now. So I have everything to the best of my knowledge, because it's hard to find the right full list or whatever. But so I do two things now to kind of keep collecting. I get those weird things from other countries, like if it's a hardcover or a cooler cover or something like that. But I also get promo items too. So, you know, just like posters and like the bookstore displays and stuff. And I have tons of that.
I think Evan got himself a Dark Empire poster from Celebration as well, which is awesome.
Oh, really? Dark Empire. Interesting.
So either from Celebration or he got it online, but it was like the full-size movie type poster.
Oh, wow. Oh, yes. He probably got it. Okay, I was thinking of Dark Forces for some reason. Dark Empire, probably Matt Bush's. I think I might have that too. And it's the one that's got the really cool tagline. It says, "The only way to know why your father turned to the dark side was to join." You know, is that what it is?
I forget exactly what it says now, but
it's gorgeous, right? It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, it's great. I love it.
Yeah, I think it's Matt Bush, who also did. I talked to him about it. He says it's by far his favorite EU story.
Nice.
And he did the cover to Tales of the Bounty Hunter. So it really, really interesting. He's a very interesting artist, and actually I think it's his wife does some really cool Clone Wars art too for folks that are into that. So anyways, a little plug for Matt Bush.
Yeah, that's cool. Can definitely appreciate the artists and everything that do that. And yeah.
A couple years ago, Dave Seeley, who he's done the art for, he did the art for Shadows of Mendor, actually, and he did it for a couple of other things I'm trying to remember, but he did it for Escape from Dagu, which never saw the light of day. But he
still working somewhere ready to be revealed.
It's just sitting somewhere, right? But Dave Seeley himself actually sold on eBay his original paintings for all of those book covers.
Oh, interesting.
Oh my gosh! If only we had a couple of crazy. The ultimate EU memorabilia. The weirdest piece of EU memorabilia I ever saw online, because every day just for fun I go look for random stuff and see what's out there. You know, Del Rey book promos, things like that. Was Brian Daly's yearbook from high school.
Oh.
His actual copy. And I was like, this is kind of bizarre. And I didn't buy it, but I was like, this is a unique piece of EU memorabilia for sure. Yeah,
very obscure, and you wonder if you should even collect it if it's not connected to Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly. I love every tiny little thing, and it's one reason why I like the posters or the promo items, even if it's like a bookmark that was like officially put out at a convention or something, because it's just the way that it just shows you the way they marketed it, you know, in some cases differently. And it sometimes puts a slightly different spin on the story. And it's one reason why it's actually kind of interesting to compare the covers of the back covers of hardcovers and paperbacks of the same book, because sometimes it has different promo language, you know, which is kind of intriguing, right? So
yeah,
story, you know.
Because I think even between the 20th anniversary Heir to the Empire that I have and the paperback that I have, they don't say the same thing like the official continuation of the Star Wars saga in the 20th anniversary one.
That's right.
Because
the EU was in canon, right? That's why.
Yeah. Because everyone knew the EU by the 20th year.
Yeah. Right.
That's awesome.
That was great. When that came out, that was so cool. I couldn't believe when I saw that. I kind of thought you did the other two.
Yeah. And what's interesting about the 20th anniversary edition of Edge of the Empire, I managed to go to the bookshop and order that from the bookshop after the decanonization. So they had some available, which I thought, wow, I really lucked out on that.
Mm-hmm. It's nice, actually. That's one of those few books that you still will see at like even Star Wars Celebration, that like Barnes and Noble booth will sell or something. Because why? Because Timothy Zahn's there. And it's, you know, so that they know it's popular. So it's one of those few EU books that actually still seems to be circulating in print, which is really good, in hardcover.
Yeah, definitely. And they put the new covers on it and everything as well, which is cool.
That's right. Yeah.
But I do find it annoying where you're like, some stories are really expensive to get and they haven't reprinted them.
It's super frustrating, because I think you're like me. I think you also you've got a bias for, you need the physical copy, right? I mean, it would be one thing to get it digitally to read it, but you kind of want to have it for the collection, right?
I want to have it for the collection. I did build the digital collection first as best I could, but I want to have the physical copies because there's nothing like holding the book in your hand. No,
exactly. And at this point too, I mean, it's you feel like Jocasta knew, you've got to build the Jedi library back up. I mean, it's there's something important about it. For the time being, it's gone, and it may not come back, and we need to kind of preserve it, right? And that's one way of doing it.
We need to have everything to hand down to the next generation as well.
That's right. I mean, I'm super excited. I've got young kids, so I mean, I'm genuinely looking forward to them being able to like see all of that there and be like, great, I know where to start reading, so.
Bedtime stories, just pull out Jedi Apprentice.
Yeah, right, exactly. So yeah, what's some of the hardest stuff you've, what are you still looking for?
The adventure journals.
The old West.
How much it would cost it to be nearly $900.
Wow.
To get them all.
You do not want to know how much I paid for them. Really.
And I'm like, I do not have the money for that at the moment.
That's crazy. $900. Why? Just because of?
Because I'd have to pay for them through the cheapest way would be through someone over in America.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to pay for shipping.
Oof. Yeah.
Which it'll be cheaper for shipping because they're all in one bundle rather than ordering them separately if they're through someone getting them in America.
And the trick is, I mean, how often are you even find them all collected? Right? That's tough. That's really tough.
Some of the other bits and pieces, I mean, I need to update my list from my timeline still because I want to do it when I'm at my shelf. But I've got only a couple of junior novels left, I think. Just have a look here. So there's one Star Wars Missions book that I'd be able to get. And some of it's just the children's books, like the Wookiee story book, and I don't think I found the Maverick Moon when I looked it up online a while ago. Stuff like that.
There's 2 editions of Maverick Moon. There's 2 different covers. You got to be careful. Yeah, so you got to get both now, right? I've added more to your list.
Oh dear. It's like the game books and the actual novels for the missions books. The adventures.
Yeah. I think you told me, right? Which missions one is it? It's the one with Tarkin on it? I forget. You told me. I've kept an eye out for it.
Imperial Jailbreak it's the one I'm missing from them.
It's those the Star Wars Adventures from episode 1 and 2. Those I think are trickiest even here because it must have been the case that very few towards the end were even published because I regularly see a couple of those on eBay for $200-$300. It's crazy.
The website I found really good is abebooks.com.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been really good because the shipping costs more than the book, but you can find some of the really rare stuff a lot cheaper than you find it elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a good resource. It's funny. I mean, it's definitely the case. You get to the point where, particularly with these like collections of books, where you have to You just have to buy like lots, and you're going to overlap. You're going to get a lot of duplicates, but it's
Yeah, when you get the lots from eBay, I've definitely got some double ups that I need to put them up on eBay or something just to sell them.
Yeah,
because I don't need them anymore.
Yeah, I remember. There's some expensive stuff out there. But some stuff's like crazy cheap too. But every once in a while you find a deal, So if you persist, and every once in a while.
My parents were away actually one time and they found a lot of 50 Star Wars comics that someone said, hey, oh, no, it was a heap of Star Wars comics. I forget how many, but they were like, hey, you can have all this for $50. And they got it for me, and I was like, wow, that's such a steal.
Yeah, some people don't know what they're giving away. It's amazing. I've gotten some crazy deals, and I think generally people are just like they're just trying to get rid of their stock for a while for whatever reason, So
and the saddest thing that I've seen is just people losing their love of Star Wars after the decanonization and just selling off their collections.
I've seen that too. It's really sad. I mean, every once in a while you'll go into a used bookstore here and you can see like some huge influx of books, and you either think someone's on hard times or something, they need some money or you just think, I guess they just gave it up, and it's that's sad to me. That's always sad to see. Well, something that happened recently. I mean, do you know Nathan Butler? Yes. Long time Star Wars aficionado, super knowledgeable, ran the timeline.
Yeah, I got to try and read through his Timeline Gold at one point properly, because just that level of detail takes a lot to understand and get through.
It's so detailed, and and he's one of those guys who for years was a resource to Lucasfilm, right? He was just a fan, but he even ended up contributing something to the Star Wars Tales comics. But he very recently just decided, he's also a huge fan of the new canon. He follows that, even though he's been pretty public about some of his concerns about it and the story group and whether the storylines are coherent, or who, it doesn't seem like anyone's really sort of at the wheel, but he sort of recently just decided to kind of start giving up his old EU collection. I mean, here's a guy who had everything and had it from day one, been a fan his whole life, and he's just started to sell it off, which is, wow. Again, I mean, I'm glad that he's like, at a point where he's like emotionally ready to do this, more power to him. But wow, is that sad? And I felt only slightly guilty by taking something off his hands. You know what I mean? But at least I felt like it's now a good home, so.
Yeah, it'd be in a good home then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't hear he'd done that. Wow. Because I haven't kept too close a track on him. I sort of know of him, but mostly because of his timeline more than anything else.
Yeah, he and a buddy of his, they run a Facebook group now called, I think, Beyond Star Wars Beyond the Films. I think it's related to a podcast they do occasionally. And there was this was a couple months back, there was just this sort of random note, and it sort of said, hey, if anyone's looking to fill any gaps in their collection, Nate is like, let Nate know. And I was just like, what is this? And he told me offline, he goes, yeah, pretty much anything is for sale, anything. And it's like, wow. I mean, these are the stories that he used to build the Timeline Gold, right? These are the things that he poured over. And it's sad, but I get it. At some point, there's only a limited amount of space. I just moved. I don't know what I'm going to do with my Star Wars collection. Like normally you would have seen it behind me, but I don't have the room for it here. There's no dedicated room for it. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm not going to get rid of it. I know that, though.
You just have to put the shelves in the public areas.
Yeah.
Don't have a dedicated room. They're just everywhere.
I'm torn because I think my wife would find that a good idea, nor would I, given that, like, I think the kids would come around and destroy them. So I just don't know what I'm going to do.
Sometimes when some people see that, they assume that you want to talk about the new canon as well. It's like, no, not really.
Yeah.
It's a good chance to introduce people to the EU if they do start talking about that.
Totally. It's fun. I had a conversation with someone recently who knew I was into Star Wars, and so they wanted to talk a lot about the new films. And again, you can't help in this popular culture, you can't help avoid stuff about this. So we all know something about it, right? So I had a couple of things to say, but then kind of introduced the EU. And what was so great was he was super excited because he wasn't necessarily an EU fan, but he knew about it. So then he started sort of asking me, oh, okay, well, I heard about this old story. Is that canon? Oh, is this canon? So we kind of got to, it was funny. He kind of started to like figure out, what is this old thing? What is this old EU? And I think now he's really intrigued and wants to go back and actually start reading it, which is really cool, right?
That's awesome. I definitely encourage everyone to do that because that's getting more people into the love of the stories that you enjoy as well.
Absolutely, and it's fun. I mean, I guess to kind of connect back to the whole Star Wars movement thing. I mean, I there's a lot of talk and rhetoric about how we all need to be positive, and there's a lot of people who've got a lot of ideas about how we're supposed to be as EU,
Yeah,
right? But the only thing I would say is that I think there is something to being positive, not for its own sake, but because it's like, well, it's just fun to be into the EU. It's a fun
yeah,
form of entertainment, and I sort of feel like the more fun you have enjoying it, I think the more likely someone's going to want to then pick it up for the first time because they're going to see you enjoying it, right? You don't need to sort of be phony and pretend to be all positive about something no, just enjoy the EU, celebrate it, and people will, I think, find that really attractive.
yeah, definitely. That's one of the things I love on my channel is just being positive about it. But also at the same time, you be realistic about some things, and if someone does ask a question, you go, "Well, this is my opinion on it."
Yeah, and I think it's really cool too to also admit that like you don't have to like everything either. I mean, it's kind of like like in teaching, it's really fun to sometimes like show the kids that like maybe you and another teacher disagree about something, right? Then they realize, oh, that's right. I'm not just being taught some, doctrine. It's like, no, like we're thinking through these things, right? And so it's great. You can be positive by also sort of saying, I really don't like the way Timothy Zahn writes Mara Jade. I think she's one dimensional. You can say that and still love Heir to the Empire, right? And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, jokes.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So, but yeah, just so you can have good, positive, fun discussions about the EU. And that's, I mean, that's what I wanted. That's what I did for years anyway. And the internet's actually just allowed me to do that with more people. It's one of the weird ironies. I think the 2014 decanonization has actually brought more EU fans together than anything prior, right?
What I love about it is that you're also getting new people into the EU, and that I heard the story from the guy that was on the discussion with Matt Edward. He got into it after 2014 and had only played a bit of the games before. So there's definitely the way that people can get into it from not liking the newer content and saying, what else is there out there?
I think it's great. And that's why I'm always interested in like, where did people kind of get into it? And also kind of like what generation of Star Wars are they, right? Because it's kind of fun. I mean, I remember a bit of background here, not to get on a tangent about the Clone Wars, but I'm not a huge Clone Wars fan. And I remember at the time, kind of when it came out, I tried it and I was kind of like, yeah, I get it. Not my thing. It's definitely not the old Clone Wars that I liked more. But I remember at the time, I mean, I was already pretty old and I was kind of starting to think, gosh, like, is the EU moving away from me? But I started to notice that like younger kids, like guys my age who had young kids, had kids who loved it and were getting into it. I remember thinking, oh, this is cool. Again, like it's not for me, but I see the next generation. I see the seeds being planted. That was so cool, right?
That's awesome.
And those kids are like, now they're teenagers, 20 years old now or something, right? And hopefully some of them are still picking up the old stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, hopefully, because it's definitely something I just want to say. I'm not keen on the new stuff. I've given it a chance a lot more with just the movies and that, but it's just like, the more I hear about what they're doing in it, the more I watch it and stuff, the less interested I am. Is the main thing. And so I just love the EU a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I read some of the comics in the very beginning. So I forget when they started coming out, but this would have been before The Force Awakens. I think that's
sort of just after 2014, because like Son of Dathomir came out, and that was both just afterwards.
That's right.
And then a couple of others.
There was a series of comics that were sort of like some kind of prequel tie-in to the movie, and it was called like, I forget what it was called, Road to Force Awakens or something. But there were a couple of miniseries. I remember there was a Chewbacca miniseries and a Lando miniseries. And I remember I'm into comics. I was at the comic shop every week, and I was like, okay, I'll pick this up just to sort of test it out. Because at that point, still, I'd been sort of part of like an EU preservation movement, even before 2014. But that was that weird period of time where you were like, I don't know what's going to come of the EU. So I said, look, okay, I'll pick up these comics, right? Anyway,
Yeah.
Give it a shot. And I remember reading the Lando miniseries. It was like 4 issues or something, and all I could think was, like totally fine story, but kind of simple. Didn't really, I remember thinking, I remember really buying the rhetoric hook, line, and sinker. I thought, oh wow, okay, they wiped the slate clean. This Lando miniseries is going to have all the answers about what the new vision is, and instead it was just a random story that could have easily been an EU story. It was kind of a boring story, but I was just like, you neither excited me, you neither sort of really set out a new bold vision. I said, what is going on here, And so I just kind of like, well, if this was my first go at the new canon, I said, I'm not that excited about going forward. And moreover, I said, I don't know why they ever rebooted in the first place. So from out the gate, they lost me.
Yeah. Can definitely question why they even rebooted when they're just reusing a lot of elements from the EU. Anyway.
Yeah, that drives me nuts. And it's funny, I kind of hinted in that S-Canon video about why they think they can get away with that, right? You can kind of understand their process, but I just can't take the sort of the, talking out of both sides of the mouth, right? It's all garbage, it's all crap, it needs to be rebooted, it's all a mess of contradictions. Oh, and by the way, we loved everything about it. We love Jackson, we love, that now there's talk about Mara Jade going to be in the film. I doubt that, but there's always that rumor.
There's a rumor from before episode 7 as well.
Yeah, it seems like there'll be that rumor for years, right? She's, if they end up doing this like Old Republic film series, somehow she'll pop up in that, but if anything, it's a funny parody of a lot of Timothy Zahn's writing within the EU about how Mara is always there. She always seems to conveniently be there just off camera, but yeah, I'll never understand why they want to stick that stuff back in. I discovered something recently that really, really shocked me, which is that this old random character from the West End game role-playing series, Platt O'Keefe, who's this fun.
Yeah, I think I heard about that, but I forget the details.
So there's a bunch of role-playing game supplements they created around her, and she was a smuggler who would appear in other West End game RPGs at the time, who would sort of like give you, if you're playing a smuggler role, different tips and stuff. So a fun old classic character from the old EU, who for like no reason they mention in a footnote in a new canon reference guide now. And it's like, you can't think of the name of a new smuggler in this new bold universe, And it's like, guys, just please think of a new name.
The thing about that especially was in the art book for Solo, the movie. And the people were saying, oh, this has references to Exarch Kun, and this has references to this and this in the EU. But then Leland Chi tweeted that, no, we're just using it as a reference back to the EU, and that's actually not canon to the universe.
Huh.
If you're going to build up a new universe with world building and everything, you create the stories to connect to that and create new things.
And that's the thing, we kind of talked, I can't remember if it was on camera before we jumped on, but about how at the end of the day, it's just a work of fiction, right? Don't take it that seriously. But at the same time, this is what's actually, this is almost, saying that is almost an indictment now of the new stuff, right? Which is consciously what they want it to be. It's just a movie now, right? They've de-elevated really the depth of the books and comics. They're really just media tie-ins. They don't do anything big or bold. They slightly extend the stories. They've made a big deal marketing-wise out of this is the end of the Skywalker saga. They want you just to focus on the film. So at the end of the day, it's just a movie, and like it's kind of sad, right? It's
a TV show, which they seem to be going into now a bit more. And yeah, I know, and the EU holds a place in their hearts. But definitely, as I've said before, but I don't think we're on camera. It holds a place in our hearts, and it has helped people learn some life lessons that help them through tough times. But at the end of the day, you can't get too angry at Disney and everything for doing what they did, because it is a fictional universe and they have a completely different mindset towards it than us fans do.
Yeah, that's right. And you can kind of, you have to kind of agree to disagree with them, right? It's their prerogative. You get it. And that's the thing about the EU movement and whatever it is we mean by that, with this goal of getting Legends to continue. The funny thing is how often people inside that movement who sort of self-identify inside as members of that is like, they sometimes, I think they even take that movement too seriously in a way, right? To the extent that like, it's just a fandom, right? It's just a group of people who have an idea about what this fandom wants, and that's it, right? And when people say things like, well, we have to think this way, or we have to do this, or else we won't get it, it doesn't really work that way. It's not as if we all collectively think the same thing at one moment and it materializes in the world. The most we can do is like hope to keep interest in this alive. And when things like 108 hit, that we all buy it like crazy, right? And we just have to let the market work, and it's up to us in that sense, at least, right? But again, when people want to like kind of police others and the movement and stuff for what they think and how they approach it, it's like, because everyone always has this threat. They go, if you don't do that, or if you think this, or if you're associated with this person, Lucasfilm isn't going to give us what we want. As if Lucasfilm is some like, mafia gangster who's like, they're just to spite you. They were like, we were just about to return Legends, right? We're going to give you Sword of the Jedi, but we didn't like that like you gave on Geeks and Gamers video or something. That's not the way that world worked. They didn't reboot because they were mad at us. I mean, we're just a bunch of fans who just want to convince others to be fans too. That's it, right? So,
yeah, definitely. Just thinking for a minute. What else with that is that, also gatekeeping isn't something we want to do.
No.
Keymaster video.
Yeah, don't gatekeep. And again, I mean, I get it. At the end of the day, I know that there is something identifiable as an EU movement, and I guess I'm a part of it. But at the same time, it's like I don't want to gatekeep, and I kind of don't want to be part of a movement. Like in some sense, like I kind of hope that someday the EU movement gets to sort of disband and we get to just be EU fans again, right? Because in other words, because we've gotten whatever it is we're sort of hoping for. But you kind of wonder, you kind of wonder, like, are there enough EU fans who've had enough conversations with themselves about what they want from Lucasfilm, right? Are there some who are always going to be perpetually unhappy regardless of what we get? Are there some who aren't sure why they're not sure why they're fighting other than they like a fight? And the funny thing about gatekeeping is it sometimes seems to come from those quarters of a fandom that don't really have a sense of why they like the fandom or what they want from a movement. They just love the fight. They love the gatekeep. They love, they love the friction. They love sort of throwing social media bombs at others and stuff. And when you start to see that, I start to think that's not a problem with the movement. It's an indication that there are some within it who just like, they don't know what they want. They don't know what they like, right?
They don't really have the same goals in the end. It's just at the basic level.
There are some, and frankly, there's some whose goals is just to be in a movement, and they just love it. They love this idea that they want there to be memos and dictates about what we should think and how we should act and stuff, right? They really got a strong idea about that. They want that, and I don't get it. I mean, again, I didn't sign up for any of this because I want to get into rap battles with other YouTube channels. It's just about, when you've got something to say about the EU, you get to say it, and that's it, and you hopefully you get people to think, or you get people to read more EU, or that's it. So this is that all we have are each other's ideas now in the EU, because we're not getting anything new, right? So
yeah, definitely. SWOTOR, but that's more because of the contract. And like you said yourself, you're not really a video gamer, so
not a video gamer, but I love the lore that video games, generate, right? And it's been great. I mean, they've slowed this down, but I mean, there were a couple of very, very, very short stories that came out of post 2014 Old Republic expansion.
Yeah.
So that's been good. I heard this rumor a long time ago that part of the license that BioWare had allows them to at any point create novels still, the licensed novels, which would be awesome. I don't know if that's true. If it is, I don't know why they haven't done it, but
yeah, it might be something that new tinfoil hat theories, whatever. It might be something that if they try to do that, then Lucasfilm or Disney might try to do something and say, no, you should be writing these books to be in a new universe.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also think BioWare too is like it's pretty clear that they seem to be kind of. I know they know it's sunsetting. I mean, they've been winding down. You know, Drew Karpyshyn isn't there anymore, so that's part of it too. I think just creatively they're pretty stretched thin on the expansions, but
yeah, I mean, it's sort of just hopefully they just tie up the story before it ends.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, that's the thing. What a unique position they're in, right? They know what's coming. They can do something. And I think this is funny, you know, for all the hate that Filoni gets, even from EU fans, right?
Yeah.
Maybe especially from EU fans. The Clone Wars was canceled without him seemingly knowing, right? I mean, to the point that we have unproduced content. And so I think that's really interesting. I mean, when you try and dig in and like what happened and why, it's so muddy to the point that even one of their guys had no idea that show basically gets canceled midstream. I think that's really interesting to reflect on, right? So no one had a chance to wrap this thing up.
Yeah, and that was where I think they transitioned quite badly to the new timeline, because they just completely like, let's cut it off. Oh, you have 1313, which is pretty much finished, but no, we're not going to release that as a sort of last bit to sort of, instead of doing a fade into the new timeline, they just cut everything, even though it would have made them lots of money.
Yeah, right. And that's the other thing that was so ham-fisted about the transition, where it's like, you know, it's like, was New Dawn really supposed to be the inauguration of a new Star Wars Del Rey? No, it was just the thing that was already in publication. You know, it was already being conceived. And a few of those other books in the early days, it was just like, really, like, you want to go out the gate with this Tarkin book, and it's just, you know, almost like out of like you know, fellow Star Wars fellow feeling for like the fans of the new canon. I wish they'd done it differently. I wouldn't have followed it. I just wished for their sake, you know, here's the new book, here's the new statement, here's what we think, right? They didn't do that. It's just so weird.
Books that clearly set up that the world is different,
right?
And actual world building for the new universe, which they have ended up doing a bit more later. But
yeah,
again, a lot of that's in the movies.
Very, very interesting. Matt Wilkins and I disagree about this, but I don't believe in mixing canons. If others want to, that's great. I understand there's a few folks who do that because they sort of come to Star Wars in the EU with almost like a chronologist sort of mindset. So they want to just take it all, and I get that, right? But narratively, I take Lucasfilm at their word. They rebooted, therefore, by definition, it's not part of my canon. But given that there's a couple of those books that were in the works pre-2014, right? I don't consider them. I do not mix them. However, I do have them. So I have Tarkin, I have Heir to the Jedi, and I have what's the third one?
I'm having a blank now. Dang it.
Why can't? Lords of the Sith, the Paul Campbell. So I have those three because, again, I do not consider them part of my canon. I don't, but they're part of this weird transition, right? This really muddy transition. And I'm for all things Lucasfilm. So I have like all the Indiana Jones books and Willow and stuff like that. So for me, it's like, I couldn't leave them out there unpurchased. They have this weird place in sort of like my EU index, right?
Yeah. And what I heard is that though they were mostly in the works beforehand, they just changed a few more smaller things for the new timeline.
Yeah, I think Tarkin is much subtler, but
even then, like Tarkin, apparently, I've got a friend that reads all of the new canon material, and he mixes canons and takes what he wants. So more power to him. I wouldn't want to read through all the stuff trying to do that. But he's saying that even Tarkin in the new timeline has a continuity error with some other things.
Oh, even within the new canon?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's something.
At one point from what he's told me, and it's really interesting.
You know, it's I'm totally willing to allow there to be like, there's mistakes, and there's like there are continuity errors in the EU that really are just mistakes, and I let those slide, right? They're editorial to stay. I'm an editor in real life, so I get this. Sometimes it happens, but like but yeah, like it's weird. You kind of get the sense like there's just no one at the wheel, you know? And again, for all of the rhetoric of it's all on the same level and it's all connected, all tied in, it's like no one really seems to be guiding this. In fact, we know for a fact that like the story group does nothing to do with the films, right? There's no guide there. So you just start to wonder like, how connected is this, right? And anyway, but not my fight, you know, not my fight to fight, but
yeah, it's a different perspective for the new management. So,
but I will say this, I mean, and it's and the S video canon that I did recently kind of ties into this. This is what's so great about the EU, just from a narrative perspective, right? And it's something that I remember post 2014, there was a natural sort of over defensiveness many EU fans had of the EU, and they said it was perfect. It was perfect. No, it wasn't, right? And actually, it doesn't have to be. And something like the hierarchy allows it to become perfect over time, but it doesn't. It's not born perfect, right? And that's okay. But that's the danger. That's the danger when
older stuff.
What's that?
Especially with the older stuff that was lumped into S-Canon and that. Then
oh, totally right. And then of course the newer stuff. It's like how many times does Evan Peel die in different ways? You know, all this kind of stuff, right? And that's okay because you know, given a long enough timeline, it all can add up if you know.
I think they would have definitely done more retcons to make the Clone Wars fit if they did.
Oh, totally. Yeah, exactly right. But it's like with the new stuff, it's just this is why just structurally it's so fragile to me. It's just it can't all be the same tier. Then you can't make any mistakes, which again they've already done. If there's even one superficial mistake, it's broken. So I just don't get that, you know. And again, you realize that there was no one creatively thinking about this. This all was rhetoric, right? You know, and it's just a shame.
Because I think even someone tweeted on Twitter, of course. But continuity isn't as big a thing for them now, so it's a different mindset that they do have.
That's right, and you know, conversely, for as much canon talk as EU fans make, I don't care about canon. I care about continuity.
Yeah,
I don't care about canon. It doesn't matter. T canon, S canon, G canon. It's what straight line or what line can you draw through the different levels of canon to tell a consistent story. That's all I care about.
Because we don't care if it's S or C or whatever, or even the Infinity stories we love, but there's still the interconnectivity and how everything works together. But it really draws us to the universe.
Right. So that's what keeps it living, right? You know, so people are going to accuse us of not being positive and therefore preventing the movement from getting more legends, but we should probably stop, you know.
It's their personal opinions on the new directions.
Yeah, well, I know, and I do think it's helpful to contrast the two. I mean, because you don't have to have read the new stuff to sort of see just again structurally the difference. And I think there are a lot of interesting differences. And like I said, I mean, I think clearly they've doubled down on the idea that Star Wars is now basically just a series of films with lots of then tie-in stuff below it. Because like everything these days, everything's a CU, everything's a cinematic universe, and that's something that just pre-2014, I don't remember EU fans wanting new films. In fact, I remember many fans saying, you know, the prequels are okay, but like maybe they ruined a good thing. Let's just leave well enough alone. No one wanted sequels, you know, and
I don't remember any talk about that either.
Yeah, it's funny.
And George Lucas himself has said that he didn't want to make any more movies. So.
Yeah. I was totally fine with that, which is weird because it's hard to remember now, but every once in a while I would think, okay, well, how long is the EU going to go? But you kind of thought, as long as there's a Lucas at the helm, whether it's him or his daughter or his son or someone, right? His daughter was writing Clone Wars episodes and stuff. You'd sort of think,
really understands the universe.
Yeah, exactly. I've come to think though, and I wonder what you think about this. I mean, it's kind of a complicated thing to articulate, but I wonder without George, like, what realistically can we hope for from the EU? Because I sort of think like pre-2014, there was probably at least three things kind of interconnected that kind of held Star Wars and the EU together. And I think it was George on the one hand, both through like just his personal sort of, you know, everything he is, plus his sort of delegating his sort of, you know,
his creation of the universe and his perspective and everything being inputted in.
Absolutely right, and slash sort of his delegation of those ideas to like the Lucas, the licensing department, right? So that kind of the Lucas sort of realm, and then you had the authors themselves, the EU authors and writers and contributors who loved it as much as George, who were fans themselves, right? Who they didn't need to be told to connect it; they wanted to, right? And there's a large extent to which they made this a reality. And then I think the third piece is us. It was the fans who loved it, who kept sort of like demanding more, who would hold both George and the author's kind of feet to the fire. And I think the three of us, not to be pretentious about us, but I think all of us kind of had like a separate but kind of equal place in kind of holding this together. And
own circle.
Yeah, right. Right. But I think like I think if you remove any of those, you kind of start to tamper with the natural order, right? Like the fans are still here in theory, right? We want more EU. The authors, well, I'm sure they'd love to be involved, right? But without George, you kind of just wonder, like, have we fundamentally lost something, right? I wonder about that. When you see what's happened to the new stuff, I think there is reason to worry about what might happen to the old without him there.
Yeah. I do think that they clearly have a different vision for what Star Wars actually is. And at the moment, it's a very different one for who's in charge now to what we're used to, especially with the EU and everything. And so that's the reason why I'm not as keen on the new direction. As far as I think, if hypothetically you were going to replace George Lucas with someone that wasn't him, but the ideal person, it would be someone that's talked to him a lot to really understand what his view of Star Wars is, to very much be able to make the choices he would make for the universe, while at the same time, of course, they would want to put some of their own elements in. But I think you'd need to keep what the core of Star Wars is intact for someone to replace that Lucas element.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's like maybe something could fit almost a la Indiana Jones. If you could kind of replace that idol with the bag of sand just at the right time, kind of maintain just enough of that. But yeah, I think that's right. And it's kind of fun to speculate on who could have done that. Again, I would have been happy if it was just one of his kids or something, right?
Yeah.
But and I think in all fairness to him, he probably thought, goodness, like Kathleen Kennedy's been my, she's been here for years. She's part of this corporation. She's part of this vision. I mean, he probably had all the absolute faith that she was going to continue that. And everything publicly she said indicated she would, right? Which is why I think that a lot of the decisions came from a lot of other quarters, but including JJ, I think primarily it's
a lot of different people.
Yeah. Are you familiar with, there's this YouTube channel, Midnight's Edge. I don't know if you've come across them. They did a really interesting essay maybe a year or two ago that I wish got more play in the EU community, because they talk about the deal that JJ and Bad Robot brought to Paramount and CBS like 10 years ago when they picked up the Star Trek movie franchise. And one of the most fascinating things they reveal is that what JJ wanted out of the deal was not just these new films with sort of like a new direction, kind of a reboot, a new continuity, but he wanted them to end all licensed products from the old shows, right? There'd be no books, no more comics, right? And I, for a variety of reasons, probably owing to the fact that that Paramount and CBS were kind of fractured at the time. They kind of owned different pieces of the Star Trek, that didn't work. But think about this. Think of that idea that he had and that kind of package he wanted. He probably saw a couple years later, wait a minute, Disney just bought Lucasfilm and they're looking for new film. I've got an idea. I'll go to Kathleen Kennedy or whoever else is running at the time, and here's my deal. He says, I'll make new films and a new continuity, and you got to end the old stuff. I think JJ and Bad Robot play a much bigger role than most people probably really understand.
I had no idea about that.
We need to spread the word about this, because, by the way, not like it changes anything. We can't go back in time, but I just think I'm fascinated by the decision, the corporate decision.
Place blame on one person when you should really see that it's a lot of people.
I mean, any corporate decision,
you could say that Lucasfilm management made the deal with him so they probably might have been able to make a better decision. But yeah, that's a combination of everyone at Lucasfilm as well, not just the president.
That's right. And I sort of think that this is where, again, where this idea of like the kind of like the holy trinity of the Star Wars EU fandom comes in, where it's like, even now that you've taken George out, you don't have someone who's there to say, well, wait a minute, like that stuff is what's kept this stuff going, right? You know, he goes, I wouldn't have even made the prequels if Shadows of, or, you know, what am I thinking? Shadow.
Edge of the Empire.
Why can't I think of that? Yeah. You know, but I think that Kathleen Kennedy was, you know, like, hey, great, here's a cool deal. This will make us billions. I need to make Disney happy, et cetera, et cetera. But there clearly were factions within Lucasfilm that for years had probably, and I've heard this through, you know, mutual sort of friends of Lucasfilm folks, that like people, you know, no surprise, Pablo and whatnot, who are probably kind of talking into her ear and being like, look, here are ideas we had for George for years. He always said no. And she's probably thinking, hey, you know what? Cool. JJ's here. New canon, new ideas, let's go for it, right? And I think they kept pressing and pressing and pressing. So she's getting pressure from the folks on the ground floor. She's getting this, you know, $1 billion deal from JJ. She's got to make Iger happy. It all kind of coalesces. Pablo's happy, JJ's happy. Until, by the way, until from time to time, you know, he gets fed up, right? He leaves the second movie, you know, because, but he just wanted his way.
That because they lined up a different director for each movie.
Yeah.
Which I think was at least should have had the same writer behind each of them.
It still astounds me. And again, it's not my fight. And once again, people are going to accuse us of not being positive and therefore denying mini Star Wars 109. But yeah, it's still shocking. It's just that's why I want there to be like a business book written about this or something. But how was the story?
J.W. Rinsel was writing a blog saying about the stuff leading up to The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
But then he got a cease and desist.
Right, exactly.
So there must be something they want to hide. It's what I think when they do send out those cease and desists.
Yeah, I'd love to know. I really would love to know, just on a business level, what were they thinking? And even with the messaging, right, around the decanonization, it's like, who on earth thought that stupid blog post they put up and that awful video, you remember it, you know, sort of announcing this, right? Like, who on earth thought that was going to just make us all say, oh, okay, great, it's over. Yep. I guess I was dumb for following it for 40 years, you know?
Yeah, it's like, they're just like, oh yeah, so this stuff that's gone on for 37 years is just yoink out of here.
Yeah. And the video, I don't know if you remember the video, you know what I'm talking about?
Vaguely, but it's been probably 5 years since I've seen it.
I know, I can't watch it. I saw it one time and it made me sick to my stomach, but I mean, it's a couple of folks, and basically all they do is talk about how they're like, oh, you know, it's basically Heir to the Empire, and I think they mentioned Dark Forces once or something, as if. That's
right. That's the one Matt Wilkins mentions as well, is that they have EU fans on there, but they only know one or two things. They don't talk about all the other stuff.
Exactly. You know, and it's like, and so it continues to perpetuate myths that the EU only was started in 1991. And as far as this video is concerned, apparently it ended like in 1992, you know, and, you know, and this is where, you know, poor Dave Filoni, you know, he always, poor guy, he tries his best, but, you know, I think he was out there at the time saying, you know, I love the EU, you know, the cover to Splinter the Mind's Eye is really cool. And it's like a lot more to it than that cover, you know, from 1978, you know, so, but, oh, well, what are you going to do?
1976 with the first novelization.
November 12th. That's the date. Yep. All begins.
Star Wars was a book first, even
That's
though.
right. But it was a book first. And for folks in the UK, it was a comic book first, which is kind of.
That's cool. I didn't know when things were released over there, so that's cool.
Yeah, I think it came out in. Well, I can't remember if it came out earlier, if the movie came out late, but there's something that happened there where it came out first.
Yeah.
Kind of fun. There's a ton of
countries releasing things at different times is confusing.
It gets confusing. I just saw this is like completely unrelated to Star Wars, but I just saw the Downton Abbey movie last night, and it's not even supposed to be out yet.
Oh, okay.
I don't even know how that happened. Being in America, I thought the UK would get a earlier shot at it or something, but you know, speaking of the UK and everything, there's a really interesting kind of Star Wars connection there when it comes to the EU. I mean, there's tons of early stuff that they have that the rest of the world doesn't have. And I mean, even to this day, I mean, there's other publishers there that do things. It's just when you think you've got it all, you really need to kind of go back and see what the UK publishers put out, which is what puts you in kind of a unique advantage probably compared to most North American fans, actually. But
yeah, possibly,
yeah. I bet you what you'd find is that back in the day, stuff was probably shipped there and is now, you'd be likely to find that stuff in like secondhand shops, you know, the older stuff. And this is really true, by the way, to switch topics, like with old records and stuff, like there's tons of great stuff in like Australia that like old promos and stuff that got shipped there for whatever reason, right? That you can't find anywhere else. So
yeah, that'd be interesting to see the difference. Because I haven't specifically looked into that. I've just been trying to say, okay, what is actually all of the EU stuff that I can find exists online, and even like, but there'll probably be stuff like we're talking about a couple of different things. I have a CD from something called Hot Dog the Band, and you can find nothing about it online. But I just ripped the CD to my computer and have it because it's something that doesn't exist outside of that CD, or
Hot Dog the Band.
I have some of the CDs now.
Interesting. Stuff disappears, man. There's a news article from like the early 90s, I think, that won a Pulitzer Prize that is now no longer anywhere available online. No one can read it. It disappeared. Isn't that weird? You know, so that's another reason why, yeah, I mean, it's great that everything's digital, and there's, you know, I think it was the Del Rey site. What was it called for all? Subvudo or something? Subvudo. They put a ton of old EU stuff up online, and even that kind of went away for a while. I mean, heck, like StarWars.com, when they rebooted that, you know, what was it, like 2012 or something?
Yeah.
Devastating. Absolutely devastating.
They should have just kept, and they could have had it that they just kept the old stuff in an archived format in a separate section of the site, but they didn't do that, which is really sad. Devastating. There's so much stuff on there that was gold. And now all you do is the Wayback Machine, and it doesn't have everything.
No, it really doesn't. I try my best. I spend a lot of time looking for stuff, and there's just amazing old blog posts and really important information. I just reshared something this week on social media, this old pronunciation guide that Leland Shee put out, and it's amazing. I had a great time doing it again because tons of fans were getting mad at it. They're like, no, like I thought it was this, you know, and someone thought that it was just me making them up, and they go, no, no, and they said Lucasfilm never said that this was how this was pronounced, and I said they did. They got to look at the link, but it's
Shizor is actually in the junior novelization.
What is
Shizor?
Oh, really? Do they?
Was actually in the junior novelization because they said this armchair in the adult novel had a glitch. I thought, no, I must be pronouncing it Zizor the whole. And so when I read the junior novel, I was like, oh, that's Shizor.
Yep.
Personally, I still call it Twi'lek, not Twi'lek.
Oh, that's fine. That's the one that someone got mad at me for. That's so funny. No, Lucasfilm never, you know, the one that blew my mind for years was just some of the earlier ones, like Jorus Sabaoth, I think is how you're supposed to pronounce.
I think the part where I saw that was like, I forget exactly where it was now, but an interview with Timothy Zahn, the pronunciation of the names, and just saying Sabaoth is like, whoa. You read the first one, you say, oh, Sabaoth or something.
Yeah, right. Well, I heard an interview with Troy Denning recently where he's still calling it Coruscant, which blew my mind.
Oh yeah, the audiobooks say Coruscant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which, I mean, we have it in the movie from George Lucas that they pronounce it Coruscant.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you can just, even in universe, just say, well, that's different parts of the universe pronounces them differently.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man.
But thinking of pronunciations, one thing I don't like is people hating on putting Luke in the novel, because that was mainly for when you're reading it and you're going, which Luke?
Right.
Luke swings at Luke. and then Luke dodges. Which Luke? Wait, which one's the clone?
Right.
And so you put that in for actually ease of reading.
Yeah. Right. And it's, and it has to be that way, right? Of course. Like, of course he's not actually called Luke, right? But like, and it's one of those easy targets for people, but it's like, it's a book after all. Get over yourself. It's a book, so, and that's where, I mean, what I appreciate about the EU, and I think the framework I bring to it, like I think a lot of fans do, you probably do as well, which is that like, for me, it's not just a movie, and it's not just a series of books, right? It's one big saga that just happens to be told here in a film, here in a TV show, here in a comic book, and here in a book. So just based on whatever the editorial product you're reading at the time, it's going to have different, different things it does, like, add 2 U's to the clone Luke, but it's not just a book, right? It's further glimpses into this world that actually existed, right? So again, it's like, I just amazed at the haters who stop and like want to make fun of that. It's like, I never even really noticed that at the time. I just go, this is just a book helping me better understand what actually happened in this story, so stuff like that's never bugged me. And it's, it may be another reason why I'm able to sort of take advantage of like some of the retcons and loopholes that are available, because I just go, yeah, sometimes they made mistakes, or sometimes this had to be this way for some functional reason, but anyway, so.
Yeah, you can't expect them to do everything perfectly, especially when they were inventing a new way of keeping continuity.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's going to be kinks and growing pains and everything with that, where there are some issues.
And sometimes those retcons are pretty cool, and they're fun, and it's kind of neat when something that gets it's kind of neat to think that there are things that are true but are fake, with they're true fake, right, within the universe. That's neat. That's that's sophisticated, right? And so it's what makes it fun. But so where are you now in your chronological reading?
Oh yeah, as I did mention a bit earlier, I'm in Wedge's Gamble.
That's right.
And it's interesting because when I started doing the reviews, I do remember the story better as well, because I'm thinking about it more and thinking about what notes to take down in that.
So you
sorry?
So you started with like Dawn of the Jedi?
Yeah. I mean, I read Jedi Academy and some things beforehand, but starting a chronological reading was Into the Void. Because I don't have all the comics. I'm not as big a comic person, but I'm starting to get into them a bit more recently. But yeah, Into the Void to start it off with, and it's really interesting reading it chronologically, because you see all the ways they're just interconnected with just everything in line. Because you go, wait, hang on, that refers back to that event years ago, and so on and so forth.
I go back and forth about this. I've actually began reading it in publication order again. So like trying to, just, I wanted to go back and reread. I said, let's try it this way. And, there's pros and cons to both, I think. And I'm becoming slightly more inclined towards the publication order, actually. But for the same reason, I think that because there comes a point where reading in publication order is practically like reading chronologically in a funny way, right? Because it's like you get to a point where, you know what I mean?
Because of the world building.
Yeah.
And almost each of them adds to it, and you go.
And
you know that when you're reading in publication order that this is new.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to if you're reading in chronological order, you're like, was this first introduced here? I have to check.
Right. And what's kind of neat about so you're, on the one hand, you're right. It's kind of cool if you're reading it chronological, you go, oh, wow, the connections are so impressive. On the other hand, when it comes to retcons, I think the publication order is kind of fun, because you kind of appreciate it more, because you sort of see why it needed to happen, right? So I think occasionally the publication order makes a book like Death Star all the more impressive, because you're like, oh, this needed to happen, and I see why, right? But
yeah, and probably on a reread, I'll probably start publication order.
What have you read sort of like beyond X-Wing, like that, out of order? Was there anything else?
Beyond X-Wing, so Legacy of the Force. without reading New Jedi Order.
Nice. Okay. Nice.
That's awesome because it's like you can take the series. I've read Jedi Academy. I've read the Thrawn trilogy. I think I read some of the Last of the Jedi books earlier. Let me just pull up a picture and I'll check. What I had in 2016 is pretty much what I read compared to what I now have. If I should be able to bring it up. This one. And I may as well share it with people. So that's this one. Share screen. This one. So I'd read these ones out of order. I think New Rebellion I hadn't read yet. And Imperial Commander 5 or first I'd got recently then. But yeah, most of these I've read out of order. My first actual books were the junior novelizations of the movies from Scholastic.
Oh yeah.
And Scourge I read and got a bit confused on what was happening. But it was still a cool story.
the only EU book to be adapted from a role-playing game.
Oh.
Kind of cool.
That's probably why it's felt a bit disconnected in that. But
it's one of those weird things where it's like when you realize that, you're like, wow, of all the RPG stories they could have done that with. It's kind of interesting. And I sort of feel the same way about like Ruins of Dantooine. It's like, wow, of all the books or of all the video games they had, right? You know.
This fun fact file here at the end is where I know that I watched Revenge of the Sith in the film, because in it has this question, is like, what was your favorite part of the movie? And I said when Anakin was being burnt into lava.
What's down below? Do you actually have like the old fact file like folder? Is that what I saw? What's that down there? Oh, is that no? Okay, that's like
that I got at one point because I thought it'd be interesting. Sort. Like, yeah,
that's what it is. The Fantasy Flight stuff. Okay,
I got some of this Fantasy Flight card game and stuff, but this one, you can't see what it is properly. It's the old Attack of the Clones card game.
Oh yeah, I've got that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I played that with my dad. That's fun.
Nice.
Oh yeah, and you can see the only piece. I got this. The only piece of like. I got this. This is the only figures I've got for the new canon, because this is before the Force Awakens came out. I'm like, oh, okay, if it's good, I'll get a figure from it. And I got the one set with Rey in it when all of the stuff didn't have Rey in it. But anyway, yeah, that's pretty much my starting point. A couple of them I haven't read because some I just got and were waiting to read things in chronological order and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Like Crucible, I haven't read quite yet, and The Fate of the Jedi, and that. But yeah,
I actually think a ton of even super hardcore EU fans who are around forever are still getting caught up.
Yeah,
I mean, Eckhart's Ladder, who's a really big YouTuber who's really moving into tons of EU stuff, he seems to have just finally finished it, which is great because you can see his content now sort of focused around it. So he maybe hasn't even read Crucible yet. So I feel like we're about to experience an explosion of people finally getting caught up, which is going to be great.
And that's the thing with lore and stuff. I don't want to say too much, especially on making content that. First of all, it requires a lot of time and research to make sure that I get things right. Then the next thing is I haven't read everything. And so I want to make sure that I've read everything to actually say the full story and get it right. But I'll just say what I know at the moment, which is fine.
You can just make it up. That's what most Star Wars YouTubers do, though. So
hashtag Mike Zero credibility. Yeah. But yeah.
That's the thing. I mean, we talked about this before, but like that is the funny thing about being in a movement, so-called, right? Which is that there's going to be people who feel the need to join the party and create their social media accounts or YouTube channels and just get out there and just start saying things, even if they don't know what they're saying, because they feel like they've got to get out there and say something. And it's like, again, it's okay not to, like you said, like it's okay to wait and actually read the thing and decide you want to say something about it and then say something about it. It's okay, because Otherwise, what tends to happen, those are the folks that end up then just saying something about the movement or how we need to be acting. It's instead of, no, just enjoy it and I'll enjoy it. That's it, right?
It's like I saw a picture on lightsaber variants and where they came from that only had movie appearances. I'm like, well, it's a video I've got in the works that I haven't had time to finish it yet, even though I recorded most of what I was saying. For when the lightsaber variant appeared, like in the original EU comic and that, or whichever platform, who it was wielded by, like what year it was released and that, and that's one I've got in the works, but it's taking me ages because real life as well. It's a lot easier to be doing my EU reviews and the video game stuff because you just sit down and record it a lot of the time.
Yeah. Oh, I totally get that. I always have these I'm trying to develop a playlist on YouTube of reviews of these old RPG mags that I found that have Star Wars EU content. No one's really done that before, so I kind of hope to build up a library of that just to kind of help expand our lists of what's out there to collect and then also what's in this stuff. But oh God, I mean, to go through and read it and try and realize what are the connections, blah, blah, blah. Instead, if I can just get on and extemporaneously talk about S-Canon and just pull something out of my hat, so much easier, right? It's, so
definitely
it's tough to do this well, so I really respect your reviews and other folks who really have taken the time to try and go through systematically. I just can't make the time, unfortunately, but
that's fair. I'm finding need to make time to read the comics more because at the moment it's like, oh yeah, I did a bunch of the video games, just schedule them in. And some other topics so I can just talk off the top of my head already prepped and I can just sit down and talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the Defending the EU videos I sat down and recorded a Defending the EU video. Well, it's going to go for nearly 2 hours, and so I need to break it up into the separate topics.
Wow.
And I need to sort that out. And
episode 4, 5, and 6, yeah. Yeah, you've got a unique ability to talk for a very long time and not sort of lose your steam, which is admirable.
It's something I know about, definitely.
I remember whenever it was that I started getting started on YouTube, I think there was like 15-minute video restrictions. You couldn't upload anything bigger than that, right? And so for me, that's always been the gold standard. So like I will not talk longer than that. And I genuinely feel like when I talk more than about 5 minutes, it's just my personality. I feel like I'm boring the hell out of people or something. So I try and keep them short. And I've noticed something. Whenever at the start of a video I say just a quick thought, it's inevitably going to be 14 minutes and 59 seconds.
Oh. That's cool. It's good how you can keep yourself to a time limit like that.
It's tough. It's tough to do, but especially when you're unscripted. But you look off and you see that clock and you're like, okay, let me wrap it up. But it's tricky. I mean, we've got different fortes, and I think you've gotten really good at on the YouTube side of things. Again, I do something occasionally here or there. I don't do graphics. I don't really edit them or anything. I've tried to spend more time on the expandeduniverse.com just because what my hope is that, again, to the extent we are part of a movement or whatever, right? It's like, I'm glad that there's a ton of people doing reviews, and actually like Spencer Crilly has just started a review series now, which is really good. I think he's like on episode 3. So it's great when that happens, but like, there's nothing I can add to your reviews now. Right. And so from my point of view, it's like, well, if we want to kind of divide the labor, like the good news is if someone's Googling on YouTube, Expanded Universe, they're going to find you. And if someone's on Facebook, they'll find, hopefully, right, they'll find, those groups or Twitter, what have you. And what I'm kind of hoping is that if someone just Googles the Expanded Universe, then they'll find that other stuff too. But there's a website, and hopefully there's a bunch of websites, right, that can also be a place just to sort of kind of collect people and hopefully give them kind of an introduction. So of all the things I've done, I try and focus on kind of like the non-social media side of things. And it's kind of interesting because given the social media world we live in, oftentimes when I'm talking with some other Star Wars EU fan, they can't help but identify me relative to their social media platform of choice, right? So
Yeah.
you know, I was talking with Matt last week on a video, and he was sort of like, well, here's Chris, who occasionally does YouTube videos. And it's like, well, that's right, because I'm not a YouTuber, right? You know, and so, but it's kind of fun. I mean, I think it's been great to see a lot of people sort of in this fandom kind of find their specialization and just go for it, right? And some people are really good at like memes. Some people are good at videos, and it's kind of cool to see everyone kind of figuring that out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, interesting, because at the start I wasn't as good at doing the reviews and stuff. Of course, I didn't have a high quality microphone and webcam and whatnot either. I just started doing it, which is one of the main things.
Yeah.
But I just Googled how to use the editing software that I had. And then now, at the start of this year, I actually started studying film and TV, which is where a lot of your like editing techniques and stuff have come in. And I've just applied what I've been learning to practice.
Nice.
It's been awesome.
Nice.
So yeah, interesting stuff.
So you're going to become a filmmaker?
Hopefully.
Nice.
I'm not sure if I'll be specifically a filmmaker, but because I like shooting the stuff. I do enjoy writing scripts when I have great ideas, and I do like editing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of like I could do all three of those.
Nice.
But yeah.
Cool. Good.
At the moment, not exactly sure where I'll go after this course, but it's going to be awesome.
What's the scene like in Sydney? I mean, are there opportunities to do that type of thing there?
There are opportunities when you know people, I guess, like everywhere.
Yeah.
When you have the connections and people start to get to know you, and you get a bit of a reputation as well, like you carry yourself properly, you respect everyone and whatnot, then you'll get out there for sure. But it's something that a lot of times you just need to know the right people to get known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah,
it's cool.
So what's your what do you want if Lucasfilm came back and said, we'll give you kind of what you want? What's on that list?
For Star Wars, I think I'd just say, like, continuing the EU, but I think the best way to start with that is actually tying up all the stories without endings.
Yeah.
So even like Jedi Prince, they didn't finish the storyline. I'd love to get the ones that were cancelled off of that.
Oh yeah.
Your ones like Star Wars 1313, the files would all still be there in the archives.
Oh yeah.
They could definitely just finish that off. And The Force Unleashed 3, we should get a story for that, and so on and so forth. And then after that, what I just love is keep the stories the same quality as the rest of the top of the EU, of course, as best you can. It was coming out, but fill in the gaps in the timeline, like the gap between Crucible and the Legacy comics, and huge gaps in the Old Republic. Right. And I love more novels, because a lot of the Old Republic I've noticed is either the video games or the comics. So I love novels on everything, because I'm a main novel guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main thing, I think. It would be just fleshing out the story a bit more, making sure we have the full timeline.
There's just so it's interesting you mentioned Jedi Prince. By the way, I don't know if you caught this, but in my S-Canon video, I kept hedging on that as a kind of bad example for the reason you pointed out, because we know there were more, and that end up, if those have been published, there'd be no contradictions, right? We know that as a fact, but
there are also a couple of the Adventures in Hyperspace books that were cancelled.
That's right. Fortunately, we have at least one of those.
I think Judge Mangiano has them up on his website.
There was even a series. So there was Jedi Prince, but then there was like the Young Jedi Knight series, right? Which is, I think, like a 6-volume, if I remember correctly, with like Jaina and Jason. I think, is that right? I forget. It's been ages.
I haven't read them quite yet, but yeah.
There was actually,
from what I've looked up, that's right.
There was supposed to be a. I'll show you. I'd like to look it up, but that's my Star Wars right now. Unfortunately, it's not on the shelf. But there was supposed to be, I forget what they were going to call it, was going to be like even more fantasy based, and there was going to be another sort of like young Jedi with like Jaina or something. Anyway, there's tons of cool stuff like that was like in the hopper. Who knows how far it got along, but the tricky thing is like there's so many small open loops that like it's funny. Like I mean, I joke all the time. I'm like, my primary thing is like I want them to make they want them to finally kind of like close the loop on science. What was it called? Science Adventures, I think. So they made 2, and it ends on a cliffhanger. So it's like, let's do that, right? But I love Force Unleashed, even though it's funny. Like that's Force Unleashed is another one of those areas where it's like when folks say that like the EU is perfect, it's like, well, Force Unleashed stretched the lore pretty far, right? But I would love a book or something just telling us what happens and unfortunately 3. But
because they did the novels, so you'd know those, and the novels are more grounded than the video game. But the second one, you can definitely tell, at least with the video game, that it was quite rushed and
right.
as much thought into it as they could. So the other thing with that is the content that does come out, I want them to put proper thought into and do properly.
Right. I might have mentioned this at the beginning, but like, or maybe it was just when you and I were talking before, but I'm done asking for Sword of the Jedi. By the way, I'm so rude. I'm eating. I'm sorry. It's like, but I'm just done asking for it because like at this point, it's almost just more of a rhetorical talking point. I don't even know how many people even know what they're asking for when they ask for that. Were people around at the time waiting for it? It's just become this like weird rallying cry. And I get it's important, but like at this point, if Lucasfilm hasn't given it to us, and moreover, if Christy Golden is always so evasive about it when she's asked, I'm just like, you know what? I don't want to give you guys, I'm not going to give you the pleasure of even, if you guys produced it tomorrow, I'm done. I can't let you guys win on this front. So I've stopped caring or asking for it, but I would love a version where we at least know what happens, right? But
yeah, because at least the draft for the first book would be done.
And that's what's so darn annoying about Christy Golden when she's asked, because she always goes, "Oh no, we barely even came up with the title or whatever," and it's like that can't be true, right? Based on everything we know timeline wise, right? And I understand why she has to act that way, but it's so frustrating. But I kind of came up with this idea that I think would be really cool. Not like I have any power to do this, but maybe instead of there having to be some like particular continuations of older stories or something, which would be really hard to convince them. We'd have to the fandom would have to educate Lucasfilm about those gaps, right? But
it was going just ideally what I'd want.
So. Yeah. But I have this idea. It would be really cool if they kind of sort of all the old Tales books from the Bantam publishing era. If they did maybe like 4 or 5 short story like books, right? So maybe Tales from the Old Republic, Tales from the Rebellion or whatever. They kind of have some of these already, right? But like Tales from the Clone Wars, Tales from the Legacy area. So that what they could do in those is they could have short stories with some old EU authors, like maybe tell some new stories, but also use that as a chance to tie up those loose ends, not in a full novel, but then like in a 15-page story. So maybe like the Tales from the Clone Wars is where you do all the retcons, right?
Yeah, that'd be a great way of doing it. I love that idea.
And if they did that, if they did like 5 or 6 of those,
they could even have if they have volume 1 and volume 2 or something, they could reprint some of the short stories that were only on Hyperspace and StarWars.com back in the day.
That is a great idea. Oh my gosh, I would buy 1,000 copies of that and hand that out to everyone. I mean, that type of thing would be so amazing. Yeah, it's a shame they don't. I mean, who knows though? I mean, I think the fandom and the movement that's grown out of the fandom, I think, is at a very interesting point now. This close to episode 9, because I think intuitively we all knew that we'd have to at least wait this long post 2019 before anything realistically happened with New Legends, right? Which is why the 108 story was such a surprise, right? But
because we thought they'd definitely have to finish the sequel trilogy before they have a hard look at if they want to continue the
That's right. I mean, at the end of the day, if we accept it for what it is, a corporate decision to decanonize, it's going to be another corporate decision that just said, let's not create our own competition. Let's just wait. So, the day may be coming when some of this does become a reality, but we're just at such a weird point where it's like, and I fear a little bit for our fandom when, in the next couple of months, when more and more hype comes out about that new film, it always has a way of making some EU fans more defensive about the EU and angry, and and it's like, and that's moreover when they start trying to lock down our rhetoric. No, you can't say that as an EU fan. Blah blah blah. We just need to get through 2019, and I think we're going to be fine.
Yeah, and I think we'll, especially with even some of the people that don't know the EU, but they don't like some of the new content. It's caused a lot of, especially with the hype coming off the new movie, that'll cause a lot of people to just clash from different opinions as well. And as part of the internet does, they insult each other in that, and it's just part of the fandom that I'm not keen on. Fans when they do that.
Yeah, the internet's so weird, and I sort of feel like the EU was a victim of everything about internet culture and internet pop culture and everything, and just sociologically things have changed, right? I mean, we're not in 1991 anymore, where Star Wars can just be this sort of slow burn book series that Timothy Zahn writes, that sort of goes viral in the old days, and what that used to mean. Right now, it's like, it takes kind of a post 2014 mentality to even have like a Star Wars show online for the first time, right? I mean, everything's different now, where even folks who on the EU side, maybe who don't follow the new canon, can't help but know things about the new canon, because the internet is just pushes that information everywhere. And in a weird way, it's like almost no surprise that that Lucasfilm's like, wait a minute, like, what's more profitable? Like, continuing to tell like this slowly developing narrative story through a bunch of like expensive hardcover novels, or we're just gonna like just come to 3 films, and we'll just like wash you with tons of media tie-ins that are really disposable and really easy to digest instead, right? Just this something has changed. It doesn't make it any worse. It doesn't make it worse just because it's like that, but something is fundamentally different, right? Like, is there like a new generation that's actually hungry for sitting down and reading 150 adult novels? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah, the majority does seem to this generation, especially with the advancement of technology, are very visual, and that's what they appeal to.
Yeah.
In the content, which one idea that's been around for a while is just animated TV shows or movies based on the EU stories, and they don't even have to put as much money into it as live action series and movies and that, but just to be able to tell the stories, give it enough budget to look good, of course. But like the DC animated movies, they're really good in my opinion, for the most part, and you could do something very much like that and tell the stories from the EU.
I think it'd be great. And there's rumors. There's always rumors, right? But there's more and more plausible rumors that we'll see something like this. So who knows?
Who knows?
But everyone makes the mistake.
Stuff coming out.
I think everyone makes the mistake of then sort of hoping that they go, oh, great. Like, I hope we get like animated versions of the Thrawn trilogy. It's like, why would we want that? We already have the books. Like, let's tell new stories, right? Again, like, we don't need to rehash.
I think the reason for that is because if you put it in a visual medium, then you'll start to get more of the fans of the EU that don't read the books and comics and that.
No, it's a good point. It's a good point.
So I'd love for those people to know those stories and experience them like that.
Would they be T-canon? That's interesting. That's the more interesting question.
Well, Ewoks and droids cartoons aren't, so...
Yeah. Oddly, right? Yeah.
Or they just restructure a little bit and say, well, everything's C-canon when it comes out.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's funny with the Ewoks and droid stuff not being television canon. I think that's when you start... What's helpful, what's almost educational about that is that it reminds you that at the end of the day, for all the battles we can have about the hierarchy, for everyone who's mad that Filoni got this higher level of canon, you realize at the end of the day, it was all about current Lucasfilm licensing. At the end of the day, it was a blunt tool for licensees. That's it, right? So we don't have to have too many fights about it. So it's like, great, Filoni's at S-Canon. Who cares? We'll figure it out. So
enjoy the stories at the end of the day, and
yeah,
when they do have little references to the EU, you go, yes, thank you.
yeah. I'm just in a weird position. Like I keep alluding. I'm just not a huge fan of the Filoni Clone Wars, and yet I'm still amazed. I can't tell you how many times I've been drummed out of Facebook groups or because I've said, I go, look, I don't like it, but why do you? But people tell me it shouldn't be part of the EU or it's not or something, and I'm just like,
Weird. So the thing, my stance on that is that, I mean, I'm the generation that's supposed to have grown up watching it, but I didn't end up watching it on TV because it wasn't on free TV, or I was grown up enough at that point to go, I sort of want to watch it from the start because I don't quite get what's going on, like I do with TV shows now.
Come to find out, it was out of order anyway, right? So.
So I ended up watching it a couple of years ago properly all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time I watched it. And for me, it's like there's some enjoyable stories in that, but everyone seems to overrate it, in my opinion.
You think it's overrated, you said?
Because it's good stories, but you compare it on the whole scale of how good stories are in the EU, and I go, yeah, it's around the middle. Mm-hmm. And then there's really weird episodes that you go like, droids one, which is like, that's just.
But honestly, I mean, there's stuff about it again for someone who is pretty critical of it. There's actually things about it that I like more than a lot of EU fans. Like I really find the I forget is it the last season or is that bonus season? I forget what it was, but like, Yoda and the going into the world of the Force, whatever. I thought that was great. I mean, I really like that. In fact, based on everything we hear about what George wanted to do with the sequel, his sketch of a sequel trilogy where he wanted to get in the middle, it might have been more like that, which would have been great to me. I don't know, but
I still think that he would have just written them because he'd sold it and he wanted to have some sort of input.
I think that's right. I don't think it was his like long-term vision or anything, but
because it could have even been like ideas he wrote years ago and went, oh yeah, I'll just chuck these in there. And
sure. Well, to the extent that like it leaked a little bit that he wanted to get into like the world of the midichlorian or something, I kind of thought, oh wow, that reminded me of some of those weirder elements of the Clone Wars. I was like, hey, that's fine with me. So oddly enough, it made me like that more in retrospect,
I mean, that idea could go really well if they executed it properly.
Totally, yeah.
It's a lot of ideas, really. Even if you have a bad idea, if you execute it well, then it'll be received fairly well.
I still think that, and it may be me wanting the EU to have its cake and eat it too, but I do genuinely believe it can have it both ways. I think the thing that makes it so special is that you can critique the Phantom Menace as a film if you want, right?
Yeah.
But as an EU fan, who cares about how it was produced as just some particular medium, right? Of art. I love everything I got to learn about Star Wars as a result of the lore. So that's all I care about, right? So, it's like I don't care if you think Attack of the Clones is a bad movie, which oddly I've noticed that's the consensus, and I don't understand why. But again, I'm glad I knew about it. You didn't like it?
It's a different pacing to the other movies. It shows a lot more of the love story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that slower pacing of the love story is what people don't like quite as much. But I always grew up knowing it's the lovey-dovey one. I still quite enjoyed it. Like, I love how it introduced the Acklay, because I really like the Acklays and the different creatures.
I one of the things I've realized over the years is that, amongst many fans of in the EU community, I'm pretty uncritical. Like, I like it all. I mean, there's very little that I don't like, which is why um, I don't get any pleasure out of saying that the Floating Clone Wars aren't my favorite, because I want to like them, but they had the deck stacked against them, because I'm of the age where it was like I was like a fully mature adult EU fan, had been, it was now like truly in other words, I'd made it past adolescence, I'd made it past college. Like, this wasn't some old hobby for me that I put aside, put in the attic, right? This was, and right around that time is when the Tartakovsky Clone Wars came out, right? So it's like, for me, I was like, whoa, like, this is great. I mean, it was clear from the start, even though it took forever to like, because I remember watching it at the time, you'd have to like randomly be in the room, and there it was, 3 minutes would pop up or something. But when those DVDs came out after Revenge of the Sith finally, I mean, I used to loop those things all the time. And so, I mean, no one was more excited for me around 2007, 2008 when I heard about a new Clone Wars show coming, because I think a lot of us thought it was going to be a continuation of that.
And yeah, fit in with it fairly well.
Totally, right? And I just remember the first season, just watching it and just being like, I get it, but something's different.
Yeah.
And something changed in Star Wars too, kind of in the fandom. Again, you could kind of sense a generation shift a little bit, demographics were changing. And I remember, I was a subscriber to Star Wars Insider and stuff. And I remember that even that started to change, where it was like, for the first time, I mean, again, Lucasfilm has always been about selling you a product, right? And that's obvious, right? But for the first time, you kind of felt like, oh God, that's right, I'm just being marketed to now. Because you just started seeing, it was just so cartoony all of a sudden, and so kiddie and so product related. You just started to realize, oh, that's right. Like, oh my gosh, they convinced me to buy a magazine that tries to convince me to buy more it was, something was changing, and it was just, all of a sudden, it was like, it was nothing but the Clone Wars. And that's when all of a sudden it felt like, geez, maybe it's not for me anymore.
Yeah, interesting to look at that. I wonder if they changed, like, who was in charge of marketing at all at that time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if like Star Wars Insider even changed too, or just the team. It's hard to describe, and obviously it's a little muddled because it's a long time ago now. But yeah, just something was different. And at the same time, I mean, I might not have been like fully on board with the Clone Wars at the time and stuff. Again, in retrospect, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I wish I was there every week, really loving it, because little did I know that it was going to go away someday, all the EU. But the really interesting thing about the EU was, like, towards the end of it, there was tons of great stuff coming back. So I felt like it was bringing me back in, right? Like, we were getting the big novels again and some comics and stuff. That was cool.
Crucible as a lead into something bigger.
Yeah. I mean, even the legacy comics, right? And what was kind of cool is you almost like, frankly, we'd all gotten enough of the big three, right? And in a way, Crucible is supposed to end that, right? But like,
was probably going to be the lead into the next story about them, was going to be sort of that end.
Yeah, I mean, Troy Denning's he's pretty much all but said that was, that was it for a while. But I loved at that time, the EU was so confident that it could simultaneously be telling stories set thousands of years in the past and hundreds of years in the future about, characters that weren't about, from the movies, right? And so the EU was always like, it was just this like, it was always proving that it could just like that it was truly an expansive universe, right? So
definitely agreed on that. It's really interesting to get the perspective of someone who's grown up along with it compared to me that's got into it later.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, likewise. I mean, it's neat to see where you are and where you started and like kind of what your views are now. I mean, it seems like a lot of folks that are a little younger are no surprise really into the new stuff. Makes total sense, right? But yeah, it's been interesting to sort of see. There's kind of like a middle generation. There's the older generation and your generation. You're maybe more in the kind of the middle, where it's sort of like you kind of had a path you choose, right?
And the prequels got us into the EU and that.
Yeah. I was telling some guys this on a video last week. I'm in a really weird position where it's like I never remember consciously being into the EU because I don't even remember where I heard that term. because for me it was like I'm old enough to remember when it was just the movies and some comic books and like some cartoons, and like I remember very clearly I was already grown up and like there was like Heir to the Empire in a grocery store, and I just remember being like, oh wow, cool, like there's more Star Wars, you know. It's like, oh, that's cool. You know, you hear about it now, like again, if you watch that old video on the decanonization, they have you think that like George Lucas walked up to Mount Sinai and pulled that book off of, you know, it's like one of the 10, you know, and it was this was the beginning, and for me it was just like cool, like I didn't know it was called the EU. This was just more Star Wars, you know. So yeah.
Well, I think we can probably leave that here.
2 hours and 15, I think so.
We could probably talk for ages about everything.
Yeah.
Thanks for having a chat with me and coming on and all that. It's been great.
I'm glad we could finally talk. Yeah, thanks.
See you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
And thanks for watching for 2 hours or whatever it ends up being. And see you in the next video. And check out Chris's channel as well. It's really interesting topics he talks about.
Thank you.